Chairing this event this evening, and I'll just introduce our panel in a moment. Just to say, earlier this year, the Director of National Intelligence in the States, James Clapper, was asked by a congressional committee, and these are the words: had the NSA collected any type of data on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans? No, sir, he replied. He has subsequently acknowledged that that was completely inaccurate. And basically the information that's being gathered, we'll hear more about this from our panel, seems to be, one of the most controversial aspects of it seems to be historical data, so that as many texts, phone records, metadata as they call it, so who you called, going back over many, many years for millions and millions of people, so that should your name come up subsequently and be of interest, it will be possible to work out who you contacted and maybe who you texted, maybe not what you actually said in that phone call or in that text, but certainly who you've been in touch with. So one of the issues we want to cover here is just how much information has been gathered. And then I also want to ask the panel and get discussion on how much damage has there been, if any, to national security. So we'll deal with the first issue first, how much information has actually been gathered by the NSA and GCHQ. And we'll do a very brief opening remarks, sort of just a minute or so from each of the panelists in answer to that question. And then the whole idea is to have a lot of discussion, so you can come back on that for 30, 40 minutes, and then we'll start the second half of it with a similar comment from everybody on this issue of how much damage, if any, has been done. So let me just introduce the panel, and we've got Nigel Inkster here, who's Director of Transnational Threats and Political Risk at the IISS think tank in London. He served with MI6 SIS from 75 to 2006, and very bravely coming amongst a panel of otherwise entirely journalistic. So thank you for that. Well, I say he's entirely journalistic. James Rubin sort of dealt with journalists as basically Clinton's foreign affairs spokesman for many years. He's now at Oxford University's Rothermere American Institute and writing for the New Republic. And we've got Christoph Schurman, who's with Der Spiegel, London correspondent for Der Spiegel, who published a lot of the Merkel material about 2 or 3 weeks ago, which has been directed towards them. Julian Borger from The Guardian, that's also published a fair amount of this material. He's a diplomatic editor, writing a book on the search for Bosnian war criminals, that whole thing that went on in the Balkans for a bit. And we've got Steve Erlanger, who's with the New York Times bureau chief and has been just about everywhere on earth as a bureau chief. So very distinguished panel. And so we're going to just ask, first of all, this issue of how much data actually, and what is the nature of the data that has been collected by these agencies, first of all. And why don't we start at the, you're welcome now, on the left side.
Thank you, Owen. I'm not sure we know the answer to the question, to be honest, because these things had been kept secret, and they remain secret. And I'm not sure we know everything that Edward Snowden has either, by the way. There's no question that huge amounts of data have been vacuumed up. Everyone uses the metaphor of a haystack. It's a really, really big haystack. And I think in terms of technology, it's taken a lot of people by surprise. The ability of these agencies to hoover up, store, and keep material. The question becomes what happens to that material and how is it used, which is a whole different question. I mean, most of it just sits there. It's not very important. There is a question as well in my mind, and we can all talk about this, what are the boundaries of espionage, what are the boundaries of privacy, what are the boundaries of personal rights, and what are the failures of oversight, if any, in democratic institutions. And then, of course, there's the question of how much of that material is swept up from US citizens who have certain protections under American law, and how much is swept up from other people, allied or not, who do not have those protections. So I think it's enormous. I can't put a figure on it or a number on it, but if I were you, I would presume most everything you do and say digitally is stored somewhere.
Just about everything you've said digitally over several years.
Yeah, over 5 years or so, yeah, absolutely.
Let me go to you, Julian, the Guardian's familiarity with this story. I mean, have you got any sense for how long this is going to go on in terms of more and more information coming out each week? There seems to be more. How long will that go on for?
It's really hard to say because that there is an awful lot of material, but there is a very lengthy process figuring out what in it is a public interest, what it means, and there's this process of discussion with the governments and the agencies involved about what it means and the balance between public interest and national security. There is more. It's really hard to know how long this is going to go on.
Could he keep this going for a year?
Who's the he?
Snowden?
Well, I don't think Snowden is the driver of events here. It's not like he's got this sitting on this cash and he's putting them out. He leaked data when he arrived in Hong Kong, some tranches of data, and various different media organisations have been going through the process of looking through that and figuring out what it means and trying to make these calls on public interest, national security.
Nigel Inkster, what's your feel for how much is out there?
Well, I think again, it's very difficult to know for certain. It seems pretty clear that Snowden took with him, stole from NSA huge volumes of data beyond anything that he himself could possibly have had an opportunity to look at, and information which he could not have been able to place in context or to make sense of, as we saw with the revelations last week. Shock horror. 60 million French telephone, 60 million French people's emails and telephones intercepted. It turned out that actually this was material that the DGSE had given NSA, presumably with the authority of the government. So, we need to put this in context. But I think, what we're dealing with here is two things coming together. Firstly, a massive pressure to get a handle on a transnational terrorist problem which was not really well understood, or which the agencies didn't really feel that they were getting their arms around until certainly, I would say, 2007. And at the same time, a riptide in the levels of global internet penetration, mobile penetration, and the different varieties of communications options that were available to malign actors. Back in around 2007, who knew that Facebook was going to take over the planet? Nobody did. But now you find that there are so many different ways in which malevolent actors, and it's not just Al Qaeda. Let's bear in mind that one of the most technically capable groups of malign actors on the planet that I know about are organized paedophile groups. They're right up there on the top of, on the cusp of, what is technically capable, and you can be confident that they're using every means in their power to avoid, detection by police and security agencies. So we've got all these, there's this huge explosion of communications, none of which was driven by the agencies, none of which took place at the behest of the agencies. They were confronted with this new reality which they had to make sense of. And I have to say that in the circumstances, I think they've done a rather remarkable job. But let's bear in mind that what we're talking about here is metadata. It's not actually data. If anybody in these agencies wants to actually look at specific items of correspondence, they have to do so on a warranted basis. In the United States through the FISA court, here in the UK through a Secretary of State warrant.
Okay, so just to explain that, so that's the content of the call is still not available, you're saying, but it's just who you called is available.
That's right.
But when you say that up until, that the agencies understood better after 2007, are you saying what changed was the capacity of the NSA and GCHQ to get their hands on so much information? Is that what
I think that was a part of it, and undoubtedly communications intercept played a major part. I mean, I cannot think of any major counterterrorism investigation anywhere, actually, that did not benefit from game-changing intelligence produced by communications intercept. But there were other factors as well. It was also about better HUMINT, better general intelligence coverage that started to turn the tide. And, of course, drones.
And drones. Christoph Schurman, can you give your take from where you stand? Has all the German material come out? Is there more to come?
Well, I hope there's more to come, actually, because when everybody thought the debate was over 1 week ago, we learned that Angela Merkel's cell phone was being tapped or even monitored. And when Nigel says it's only metadata, I mean, when I imagine any spy agency, an intelligence agency, to know where I was when I called one number, which time it was, whom I called, how long the call took. That's not really comforting. So it's not only metadata, but it's a really important part of this issue. Let me tell you one small episode I experienced today, and I was really surprised. I went to the Miranda hearing, and as you know, David Miranda was stopped at the Heathrow Airport in August. And today was the first day of this hearing, and there was a discussion among the judges why this mattered at all, and why we had this whole debate about Snowden and so on. And there was one judge who said, well, you know, the threat to the national security is that that terrorists don't correspond by email anymore because of Snowden. And I thought this was really naive. We don't live in an age where terrorists read The Guardian, or do have to read The Guardian or Der Spiegel or the New York Times to know what intelligence agencies are capable of. So yes, I think, well, I hope there's more to come, actually.
Okay, just before I go to James Rubin, there are, how many seats down there? Spare ones? 3 or 4? 5. If you want to come forward, it'll be much more comfortable for you, I'm sure. So, 1, 2, 3. Got 2 more if you want. Yeah. James Rubin, what's your sense of how much information has been gathered by Snowden?
First of all, I don't know. I think that Steve Erlanger began to address it by saying that I don't think anybody knows, and I think you addressed it very well. I don't think Snowden knows. If he's got 50,000 documents from the NSA, I took one of these documents, and I actually know something about this subject, and I took a read of it, and it's pretty complicated. It's hard to understand, even for those who know the code words. It's hard to follow. They don't write beautiful English, these people, that's for sure.
Siggins, what can you expect?
And so I think it is an extraordinarily complex issue. But what I'm struck by is how this has morphed from the original issue of what Steve referred to as, you know, and you referred to as the millions and tens of millions of Americans' phones that were information was being stored, and the legitimate question as to whether that had gone beyond what the Director of National Intelligence had testified, which is a classic case of oversight failure, to what is now, as best as I can tell, a dump of information about every single capability the NSA has to pursue not just terrorist issues, that's really just one small part of it, weapons proliferation, the stories that are now covering the way in which the Western intelligence monitors the leadership of Iran, and where they're traveling and where they're going and how their aides are responding and what calls are overheard, over the Venezuelan Ministry of Planning, the Afghan Foreign Ministry, I mean, I could go on. It is now what I would call a broad-based attack on American intelligence that is being pursued by individuals with an agenda to harm American intelligence. Now, the issue of civil liberties in the United States is a legitimate issue, and if we had at least stayed with that, explored it, and I suspect laws would have changed, and they still may change. But now what we're talking about is individuals who don't like the United States or its foreign policy, trying to put as much information out there as possible about the way the United States intelligence community does its job.
Well,
And I think that is what we're now talking about. The original issue was a legitimate privacy versus civil liberties versus national security with terrorism thrown in. Now we're talking about the Iraq, Lebanese Hezbollah, the UN SRSG, the EU envoy, every single possible foreign policy issue that you can think of, the way in which the NSA has tried to contribute to American foreign policy and national security policy has now been put in the public domain. And if this is just the beginning, then it is a way to harm the ability of the United States to do its job.
Let me come back on that, because if you say, I take your point, the civil liberties thing is a completely different issue. If you take Afghanistan, where apparently we now know there was incredible coverage of Taliban down to second-tier Taliban guys, of the Afghan government, and what we know is it didn't do any good. I mean, America has lost.
We can have a long debate of why America lost, but that's not the issue. The issue is whether that is a legitimate subject where American soldiers, and British soldiers are dying in those places, whether that's a legitimate issue for putting it out in the public domain, as compared to what is a legitimate issue, which is how much of your phone calls, your information, your location is being stored by the government, and as one of my colleagues said, under what circumstances can that information be read? Now, this won't make any of you feel better, but I served in the government had access to all this level of information for 12 years. I have a pretty good idea of what it would require for the government to actually look inside one of these packages and record the conversation if you're an American citizen. I'm talking about now if you're an American citizen, because that's all I'm aware of. And it's not that easy to do. There are enormous protections. Do people break those protections? I bet they do sometimes. Are there penalties for it? Yes. So we've all seen the TV shows. They get it about right. There are protocols and rules and lawyers. And you have to go through hoops to look inside of it. And that's the issue, it seems to me. The information is out there, and if we expect the intelligence community to be able to solve some of these really hard problems, and know who's doing what on what day in what place, and we accuse them of failing if they don't tell us in advance if X, Y, and Z happen, they're going to have to gather up a lot of information and try to sort it out.
Well, isn't this a question, Stephen was referring to the haystack. That's also a question, how big do you want this haystack to be? I don't want to be in this haystack in the beginning, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all you, and then we'll do Julian and Nigel, then we'll open it up.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, obviously I can only talk about Guardian coverage, but we have drawn a pretty firm line between what is public interest and what is operational, and we've stuck to bulk collection, things that affect collection en masse, with the small exception of where GCHQ has wiretapped friendly allied governments, the Turks coming to G20 and so on. We've focused on the issue of bulk collection because it is a public interest issue. One of the reasons it is because these legal controls that you talk about that have been mentioned by various government officials as saying everything is okay, relax. These, the FISA rules in the US and REPA here, were designed for an age in which electronic intelligence involved putting a crocodile clip on a copper wire and listening to a phone call. The equivalent now is putting a probe down onto what they call the bearers, the fiber optic cables that run around the world and suck up tens of millions of bits of data belonging to us all that they can, then it is possible to filter down and identify what we are doing. So as you said earlier, it is mostly a problem of oversight here. The intelligence agencies, the enormously capable people in the NSA and GCHQ are pushing forward according to what they can do. What is missing, is quite clear, is the brakes.
Well, can I pick up on that point first and then take up what Christoph said? Because, I mean, given the circumstances that I just described earlier, do you think it would have been realistic for everyone to say, okay, let's freeze all this, let's do nothing, let's get the lawyers in and get them to debate all of this? This is not how it works. The law always follows the facts. It's not just in the intelligence sphere, it's in every sphere. The law always comes later. And I don't think it would have been realistic to expect the intelligence agencies to stop everything and wait until you got an agreed international legal definition, because I don't think that this is likely to be possible. Basically, when you're in the intelligence world, you are always interpreting the law in circumstances never envisaged by the lawmakers. That is a given. And in circumstances where almost by definition there is no precedent, you are of necessity operating on the edge. And it seems to me that I can't see how the intelligence agencies could in practice have done things much differently from the way they did. And
Although Clapper could have answered the question.
Well,
differently.
Clapper could have answered the question honestly, and I agree that lying to Congress is not acceptable. I'm not trying to defend it.
No, I know. Just
But if I can pick up on Christoph saying I don't want to be part of the haystack. Hey, we're all part of the haystack. The nature of modern communications and bulk data is such that I would argue it has fundamentally transformed mankind's relationship with information. Fundamentally, we cannot think of this in terms of what used to be there before. I mean, people in this, talking about this, talk about wiretapping still. And if we are having a conversation about transport, we wouldn't be talking about the horseless carriage. But I think a lot of people who are talking about this whole issue are thinking in terms of the horseless carriage. Things have moved on quite fundamentally, and unless we recognize that and accept the new parameters, we're doomed to a kind of Groundhog Day discussion.
Steve's just asked me to make a quick...
Well, I mean, simply to say that what bothers me is the oversight question. It's not the espionage question. We do espionage, and we've always done espionage, and we do it in different ways. The British were very proud during the Cold War of tapping or getting into the phone lines between East Berlin and West Berlin. This was a great success of British intelligence. And we were very proud, the Americans, of tapping into the transatlantic phone cables with Glomar Explorer and other things. And this was considered a great accomplishment of America. And this is no different. This is just a bigger cable. So that doesn't bother me. What bothers me is the oversight question, because this is very personal, but as a citizen of a purportedly democratic country, I rely on my representatives in Congress to exercise some oversight over the intelligence agencies. And when the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Dianne Feinstein, who's no fool, says she's troubled, then I'm troubled. And that's a whole different issue. I mean, it's a different issue from what Jamie was talking about, which is the damage done to our capabilities, because when you reveal them, that's already knowledge, because people work around what they know. What bothers me is simply this issue of, privacy. I remember, when I was a kid, and I was working summers in the Waterbury, Connecticut hospital, and because I could read and write, they had me work in the medical library. Now that's supposed to be secret, and of course the first thing I did was look up the medical files of my girlfriends and their parents and everybody else, right? And it was
Great journalist back then.
But it was fascinating. So I'm sure there are people, in the NSA who are looking into things they shouldn't be looking into. But that's human nature. But I mean, what bothers me more is there has to be a line between, as people say, what we're capable of doing and what we're willing to do and what we're allowed to do. And these are the lines that are getting blurred, I think, and I want to be reassured about them. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. No, that's all. Yeah, and if there's microphones probably, there we are. So if you could hang on for them. And it does, if you feel like announcing yourselves, it does help people orientate themselves. So.
My name is Russ Baker. I'm a journalist from the United States. I run a website called whowhatwhy.com. One of the things that troubles me about this conversation is it feels like a very small conversation. The assumptions being made, as this gentleman said, that it has gone so well with the intelligence gathering and the prevention of plots that threaten us, the assumptions about what national security is, that these people are enemies of the United States, that the people in the United States government necessarily know what they're doing, that Dianne Feinstein has a clue. I would say as a journalist, I mean, that's not journalism. Journalism is to question all of these people, if they're any good, if they're sleeping at these hearings. The reality is that the intelligence committees, and I've covered this stuff for 25 years, they were taken over from the beginning by the spy agencies. Their staff members, we had many, many examples. The House Select Committee on Assassinations was penetrated. The main guy comes out years later was the CIA channeling it all back. So my point, and I guess my question is, isn't there more going on here? I mean, and don't we need to ask, for example, who are the threats? How big really are the threats? How many have they stopped? Because if they are going to take away all of our privacy, I think we need a damn good reason for it.
So I mean, you're basically saying the threat doesn't justify...
Well, I haven't seen the proof of it after all these years. And I have to say, by the way, because we've been covering this Boston bombing story, where it's becoming more and more clear that the FBI has something to hide about their relationship with that the older brother, the Tsarnaev brother. That's a story the media is not covering. 9/11. There are many of these stories where there are unanswered questions about what these agencies actually knew about the perpetrators.
Well, that's another issue. But that first issue is interesting as to what threats, whether the threats justify the activity. Does anyone want to take that on? Yeah.
I mean, I think that is something at the end of the day that we elect politicians to determine on our behalf. That we can't do it for ourselves. We basically elect a government, and this is one of the responsibilities that they are assigned, and they task the agencies to do this. It is for the government of the day to judge, on the basis of the best information it can, what the nature or what the security environment is that it faces and what threats it faces. And of course, in a democratic society, if we think they haven't done very well, we can get rid of them and replace them with ones that can do better. I mean, what else? How else are you going to do it?
This is sort of obvious, and I don't think most of the current issue is about terrorism. As I said, I think it's got to do with the whole broad foreign policy. But I remember being in the United States after 9/11, and we had a whole commission, and they examined every single thing that was done for 10 years in the intelligence community and the U.S. government as to how we could have failed so spectacularly to figure out that these guys were in the country, taking their flying lessons and blowing up the planes. And so, yes, these things, I'm not saying there's going to be another 9/11, and I'm not saying that this is all justified by terrorism. But if we forget that after something happens, it's amazing what is done to examine the quality, the effort, the seriousness about these matters.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. The name's Ewan Grant. I'm the former intelligence analyst in Customs and Excise for transnational organised crime, although that goes back quite a way now. My question, although it is actually for all the panel, is relates specifically to Der Spiegel, which I received the English language online daily report and find that extremely useful, not least on the continental tax evasion, the Swiss banks and so on. But my question is, looking forward to further revelations about, I think it was implied by NSA and GCHQ, will that also apply to revelations about German and other EU countries spying on the UK and the United States?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, we've focused on, I mean, as Julian knows, the material is quite extensive. We focused so far on the NSA and GCHQ because we know so much from the Snowden material. I don't think we will hear very much about Germany spying on the UK. Well, frankly, because I don't think there's so much going on. I'm not naive. But I mean, we've seen this Belgacom story, and that was very surprising. And this was a really big issue here for GCHQ because it was the it was the proof that Britain is spying on Belgium, and they're both EU members. Well, to answer your question, I don't think there will be very much information coming out about Germany spying on the UK.
One of the reasons is what comes out very dramatically from the documentation is what really counts as Five Eyes. That is the alliance that matters, and you're either in that or you're on the outside. And to the largest extent, when you're on the outside, you are seen as often as fair game for intelligence operation, if you're a so-called third party. And it is striking, that we're talking about here about modern 21st century technology and what that means in terms of who you can trust. And as a result of this very globalized technology, the circles of trust have gone back to, you could argue, quite ancient ties. These are the Five Eyes are Anglo-Saxon, white English-speaking, and none of the more modern political alliances, NATO, EU, count for anything when it comes to electronic intelligence.
Can I add something? I mean, the curious consequence, one of the consequences of this whole debate could be that we saw German representatives traveling to the US trying to, well, as they said, clarify what has happened over Merkel's phone. But in reality, they're trying to negotiate better terms. Exactly. This could be a great outcome for Merkel in the end if Germany is, I'm not saying it's the sixth eye, but maybe the fifth, the fifth and a half eye, or it's maybe 5 eyes and a small eye. Or
squinty one.
Yeah.
Could you want to have a comment on this?
Well, what does Germany bring to the party? The Five Eyes is about shared culture. It's also about real estate. It's also about capabilities. What has Germany got to offer that the Five Eyes hasn't already got?
But the German
What does
BND
New
is
Zealand
not.
offer?
What was that?
What does New Zealand offer?
Geography.
Well, more than Australia? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, basically, somebody needs to cover the South Pacific,
New Zealand
and
more than we trust Germany.
Yeah. Somebody needs to cover the South Pacific.
Well, but I mean, the BND has quite a good reputation, as you know yourself, Nigel, among the intelligence community.
But what difference do they bring? What difference do they make if they join the Five Eyes? That's my question.
Good cables. Yes, a question.
My name is Thomas Ridd from the Department of War Studies at King's College. I have a question for Nigel Inkster. The NSA seems to have interpreted its legal mandate rather liberally in terms of, so they push the envelope quite aggressively in terms of what collection is okay to do. And the White House, as we know now, and including the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, were not adequately informed. My question to you is, essentially, whether you could envision a similar scenario in this country. In other words, could you imagine that GCHQ is spying as aggressively without William Hague, without the Cabinet Office, without Downing Street being in the know?
I think in the UK context that is absolutely inconceivable. I think we've got a different risk model working in the UK from in the United States. Here in the UK, if an intelligence agency is going to undertake any activity which, in the event of it being discovered, could generate political embarrassment, by long-standing convention, the proposition is put to a Secretary of State, normally a Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, and a judgment is made about the risk-benefit equation in that particular case. The other thing is, obviously, that the UK intelligence agencies are defined in terms of how they can use their powers by the various acts of Parliament that govern them, so it can only be for reasons of national security, prevention and detection of organised crime, and economic well-being. And the third lock, if you like, is the annual system of intelligence requirements collected and put out by the JIC. So you've got all these things that I think hold the UK agencies in a system where I think, why would they conceivably want to do anything over and above what I've just spoken about? In the US system, it's rather different, because at the end of the day, these things are done on the recognizance of the heads of agencies, with ex post facto reporting to the oversight committees. It works in a different way. But let me add this. I mean, if the NSA is listening to, I don't know, Gilles Rousseff's telephone, I don't believe they just woke up one morning and decided to do that. Somebody somewhere gave them in government gave them a requirement.
Ask them to do it.
Ask them to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, just simply to say, I think this is a very important point, because one of the things I've learned here is MI6 reports to the Foreign Secretary, MI5 reports to the Home Secretary. I mean, they sign off on things, and there are probably 2 or 3 times a day, I'm told, that MI6 sends something to the Foreign Office that is either needs to be checked off on, or to let them know they're doing something that could be politically difficult. And that's a very different system. So I think that's true. It's important.
Yes, there's a question here.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll stand up. Mary Dejevsky, journalist. I've got 2 points, a mini point and a bigger point. The mini point is about Belgacom and whether GCHQ was spying on Belgacom. Because when I heard that information, I remembered that I was reporting from Moscow in the last days of the Soviet Union, and Belgacom was one of the first companies into the dying Soviet Union providing satellite phones. I won't say anything more about it, I'll just make that point. The bigger point, which I really wanted to respond to Nigel Inkster and say thank you for coming into what must be pretty much a lion's den. It has struck me since the beginning of this whole saga that GCHQ has really got off rather lightly in the coverage in the British media. And I wonder whether this is because there is so much more coming out of America, and there's been so much more reaction from the powers that be in America than there has here. Whether maybe the British government has slapped a D-notice on anything to do with GCHQ and this story, or whether it's a failing on our part, the journalists, that we're not looking into this properly.
Do you want me to pick that up?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, the honest answer on the D-notice, I have no idea, and people sitting around me may have a better sense of the extent to which that arrangement applies. But I think a part of this may actually go to something James Rubin said earlier, that the focus of the story has shifted. The focus of the story now is increasingly about US state-on-state espionage, which is something that, is not in any sense, meaningful sense, governed by international law. There is no international legal prohibition on espionage, and that is where the story's gone. So, I think it's as much as anything to do with that.
What about the British coverage? Yeah,
Well, just one tiny addition. That we also have a different system in America in terms of our ability to stop anybody from reporting anything. We have a First Amendment, and I think we've seen the difference here in the British case with guys in your building and stories about sledgehammers. They haven't done that in America.
Yeah, I think that's true. The legal environment is very different. Also, the media environment is very different. Here in the UK, you have very intense competition between the national papers, and the other papers haven't to rush to make common cause for freedom of speech with the Guardian, and have rather kind of zeroed in on the Guardian, the kind of Guardian, the traitors line. There are honourable exceptions. I think that the BBC has been fairly timid in following up the story, and I think that may have to do a lot with listening very carefully to denotice warnings. But I think a lot of it is to do with the different media environment and also the political environment. You have people like Mo Udall and Ron Wyden in the States who have been warning about this for a long time and have been pushing it politically. So there is something political to report it. Here, Labour has been almost silent on this issue. In part, I think, because a lot of these documents go back to when they were in power, and the G20 was spying on the Turks before they went in to meet Gordon Brown. So they're implicated as well in that.
Yeah.
I'm James Thacker, a writer. I've worked with Index on censorship since the Soviet period and was involved with the Vanunu case before you became bureau chief. I'd like to take up Russ's point that we're really talking, though everybody's talking about what's beyond the 3-mile limit. I mean, this is like law of the sea. The laws and all of what we know about intelligence is kind of within the 3-mile limit, but the sea is huge. And I mean, a friend of mine who's practically ran the UN said spying is out of date. There will be no security screens in the future. I gather that you mentioned the haystack. I think the NSA has been scrambling to find any needles that they found there, maybe one in Los Angeles, a few here and there elsewhere. I mean, what is the justification, as you were saying? But I think America, with all of its conflicts to do with the First and Fourth Amendment, will be the country where this debate will take place. And you mentioned Feinstein, and I'm just wondering if I can draw the panel into discussing what is beyond the 3-mile limit, what it will look like in the future with this great ocean of information, how the people of the world will deal with this. I mean, I think it's very important that the Germans should be as important that they reject nuclear weapons, that they should take this issue on, and everybody should be taking this on. And how do you think this, I would be directing this at you, how would this conversation be conducted legally in America? These are huge constitutional questions. Will they be carried forward in a Supreme Court level, do you think, one day? Because we will be going to a world without any secrecy.
I think I understand what you're moving toward. One of the things that strikes me as opposed to here, I mean, and this is still maybe 2.5 miles, the debate in America is real. Here it seems shy and careful. It's become political in America, and here, as you say, it's been a bit repressed. I think The Guardian is by itself frustrated that its work has not produced a larger debate in Parliament and elsewhere. I think The Guardian finds that frustrating, separately from the rest of the British press piling on. While in America you have the President of the United States reacting, promising investigation, you have the Senate working. I mean, you have a much more open debate. Now, it may not produce the changes that some people would like, because I think in the end, as someone told us in Washington, told one of our reporters, to do the job, you need the haystack. The question becomes the rules for digging into the haystack and how you go through the haystack. I mean, it requires an enormously powerful search engine to dig through the haystack. But you can't do anything if you don't have the haystack, right? So I don't see how you get over that obstacle. Now, as individuals, we can go back to writing letters on paper. That would fool people for a while, then they can back to steaming them open. But I think we really do have to live in a world, and as a foreign correspondent, I've felt who's been in Moscow with Mary and other people. I mean, I live my life presuming that I'm being listened to and watched, that's all. And that's just a professional problem. But if I'm a normal person, right now I'm not actually that worried. I don't think the government's very interested in, who you're sleeping with and what you're talking to.
Doesn't it worry you that Jamie says it's people trying to harm America? Because the people I think you've got an attitude problem. I mean, Disraeli said he didn't mind his letters being read as long as they were answered. I mean, what is your problem about people, being annoyed with this. Some of these people think it's a civil disobedience, and it's an extraordinarily patriotic act to be doing this. Snowden, for example.
Right, but I hope you'll give me a chance. It seems that you're really the one getting upset. I have a view that Mr. Greenwald, who I remember debating on WikiLeaks, was the same argument. I said to him, look, if there was a Vietnam War issue that reached the threshold where you believed that this thing that was happening was so terrible to break your vow of secrecy, that justifies breaking the vow of secrecy. You believe the Vietnam War is wrong. You believe some civil rights issue is wrong. You break your vow of secrecy. But what WikiLeaks was the whole library, was every government cable on every issue in the whole State Department library.
But at a low level of secrecy.
Fair enough, but believe me, it was plenty damaging. And the whole idea that American diplomats can now talk to people and write it down has been changed by that. And so I believe that he thought that was great, because he thought that things had been proven about the evils, these are his words, of American foreign policy. And so I think this is now the same debate, ratcheted up from secret to top secret umbra, and that is arguably even more dangerous.
So we'll move this on to the second half of this discussion with that prompt, which, and the question is, how much damage? And it's the same with WikiLeaks, and it's the same, you could argue with all this Afghan intelligence was gathered, all this stuff. How much damage has been done by what has been released so far? And it seems to be an absolutely crucial question for the journalistic ethics of publishing this material and for the ethics of Snowden releasing this material. How much damage, how much more vulnerable are people as a result of these publications? And I don't know if any of you have got a
I'll
clear
start,
answer.
and I've obviously addressed it to a degree. But look, first of all, we'll never know, because we'll never know what changed people's behaviors. I think people's behaviors are going to change. How great? You can say, oh, well, of course they knew they were being listened to. What are you, an idiot? Every terrorist knows they were being listened to. Well, it's like anything in life. When you get bombarded with reminders, the reason why the security guy in the office tells you to shut your case 100 times is because you don't do it until the 100th time. And so this bombardment of knowledge about the extent of the U.S. government's ability to technologically find things out, I believe will change behaviors. I believe it's already, WikiLeaks changed diplomatic behavior. I don't believe the same number of people will sit down with an American diplomat and share the same information if he writes anything down. I believe that the Iranian government officials are sitting down right now trying to figure out whose cell phones were tapped when the supreme leader went down to his meeting in the South that was revealed in great detail. They're doing that right now. They've seen their entire life flash before them. That's their entire job. It's now in the New York Times. It's all over the world. So people will examine this. How much damage? I don't know. Is it worth it? In the case of civil liberties, I think there's a case. But nobody's explained to me what's the other side, the benefit of revealing the way in which we, the U.S. government, intercept the Iranian leaders' aides' cell phones. What's the benefit of revealing that? I can't imagine one. I know what the downside is.
Well, apart from speculations, I haven't heard anybody explaining me really what the damage is here. Apart from this, very specific and concrete damage is the hard drives that were being smashed in the Guardian's basement. That's a damage. But I think we're let's stop here.
Yeah. Well, I think if we're talking about the kind of top tier damage that's done, what I think is vulnerable to being forgotten in this discussion is that the United States of America was not just collecting counterterrorism intelligence for itself. The United States of America was the head of a global coalition and, in effect, collector of first resort for the entire planet. And there are terrorist plots all around the world that have been disrupted as a result of some of the activities that we are talking about. And this tends to get overlooked. I mean, we're talking about places like Indonesia, we're talking about places like Pakistan, Azerbaijan, you name it. Iraq, indeed, yeah, that's a very good point. So, it's not just America that has benefited from these capabilities. This has been a kind of global capability. That's point number one. I mean, I agree with James that we will never know. How different would the course of World War II have been if Bletchley Park had not broken and read the material that was being transmitted over Enigma? How can we ever judge? You can never do a counterfactual assessment in these areas. But I agree with James on this. What are the benefits of revealing this? What actually do we get from this? I mean, let's face it, the stupid people, and there are plenty of them, will carry on communicating with each other because they're stupid and they'll get caught. The smart people will get smart and they'll do things different ways.
But isn't this, sorry to interrupt, isn't this the core of the debate? I mean, you mentioned Bletchley Park, and there was the question here about why the British public has been so reluctant to engage in a debate about this. I mean, I'm from Germany, I have a German passport, and we regard the United Kingdom as the motherland of parliamentary democracy, and it astonished me so much that a government like like this one, even if it's a Tory government, would put so much pressure on a single newspaper. This was unbelievable.
But look, I mean,
sorry, that's a really important point here in this debate.
But what we're talking about here is basically the kids have got into the ammunition store and they're playing with live grenades. They've got all sorts of information which is potentially operationally damaging to the UK.
Are you talking about the kids who lost the material in the first place?
That was an American, that wasn't a Brit.
No, it wasn't. It was. We share all of GCHQ's material, names of everyone who works there, addresses what they like to do on the weekend, with 850,000 Americans. Half of those people are private contractors. So the odds of that getting out is very high. And yet there has been no real discussion when it comes to damage to national security over whether that was a good idea. That in the interest of having this solid partner and being America's best friend, we should give everything away into this big shared cloud of information that this large number of people could look into it. I think with WikiLeaks, I think there were 2 to 3 million people who had the clearance to see that material. So in a way, the losing of it was an almost guaranteed outcome once that had happened. I know that was a reaction to the kind of compartmentalization of information before 9/11, but it clearly isn't overreacting. Now, when it comes to the role of the press, I mean, I can only answer for The Guardian, and in both cases, in WikiLeaks and in this, we've tried to sift out, what would be harmful, and we've gone to GCHQ and NSA saying, can you point us what in this would be specifically harmful, rather than generally.
And have you defied them? Have they said to you sometimes, we prefer you didn't publish that, and you've ignored that advice?
And when it's been specific and it's been reasonable, we can see the logic, we have left stuff out.
We have left stuff out, but have you also ignored what their advice?
We have ignored the blanket, do not publish anything.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, Nigel, shouldn't you be grateful to the Guardian then? I mean, they're apparently not the kids in the ammunition depot and playing around. They're very thoughtful about this.
Well, I mean, I take the point that they're making the effort, but the fact is that no newspaper is going to be able to have the context to make sense of these details and to judge the implications of publishing any given items of data. That's why in intelligence circles we have this thing, nobody in intelligence actually calls it the control principle, but that's the term of art that has gained currency. Is that nobody does anything with intelligence without consulting the originator, because only the originator can judge what the implications would be of taking action on that particular intelligence. And I don't think an outsider, however well informed, however well intentioned, however reasonable, can actually make those judgments. They're not qualified to do it.
Where's your free press in that? If the press is not allowed to make judgment calls about what to publish about national security, you have no...
But here's where I was getting at. What's the benefit?
Yeah.
So
Okay,
then that's the, no, but that's how you make the judgment.
Yeah.
If you get a big benefit from publishing
Yeah.
it, then,
I agree with that, yeah.
then you say, well, I'm sorry, we may lose something, but the benefit is big.
And this is the benefit, the debate that's happening.
Well, I don't know about the Iranian intelligence,
No,
the Iranian
exactly.
leaders.
Well, I mean, Jamie, this is the argument one always has, because we think we're being careful, and you think the story we published on Sunday did a lot of damage.
I do.
And that's a debate, and I'm sure, we can keep having it. And I want to say there is damage done, without question. There was damage done from WikiLeaks. A friend of mine was the American ambassador to Mexico, and he had to leave his job because of WikiLeaks. I mean, things happen. It's not like nothing happens. And I would say part of the problem with the Snowden dump is we don't even know what's in it. I mean, they haven't decrypted all the 58,000 files that they took from Miranda yet. They don't even know what he's got. So this is what worries them. And I'll tell you what also worries them is now Glenn Greenwald has gone off on his own. He's not being edited by you, and he's not being edited by us. And is Glenn Greenwald unedited the same Glenn Greenwald as before? That's another question. And there's another level of damage, which is to trust, to international relationships. I mean, the United States has a big problem with its allies. And whether this was intentional or not, I don't think Snowden intended to create these issues. But we have a big problem in Germany. We have a big problem, not in France so much, but here. And I think it's going to be very hard to repair. And it's not Merkel's cell phone. I don't think even she cares all that much about her cell phone. And frankly, if I could listen to Obama's cell phone, I would too. It'd be very interesting, sort of.
Or
But
not.
it is, democracies work on trust and alliances work on trust, and that trust has been badly damaged. And that is damage. That's real.
Okay, let's get a question.
Yes, I wanted to ask Nigel to address this metadata thing, because I think we've misrepresented the real power of metadata here, and I think it's absolutely crucial. You're all talking about the damage. There's a potential damage to us of a sort of digital totalitarianism that you've completely ignored in this discussion, I think. And if this is just our phone records and it doesn't contain so much data, why on earth has so much money been spent by GCHQ and NSA on it in the first place? So, we don't believe you, frankly. And also, the truth is, to understand the power of metadata, we should be talking to, probably computer scientists. The idea that we can just, vote in a government, suggests, Nigel, that we have the information to be able to make those choices. Well, we certainly wouldn't have without whistleblowers on this matter. So I don't see how it could have impacted our ability to vote on this matter. There's an issue. I was speaking to David Davis a couple of nights ago, and he said, quite credibly, that the Snoopers Charter was introduced really to legitimise things that the secret services were already doing. So not only do we have a sort of failure of supervision, we have an absence of public consent. We have a scenario where the sort of real power of this metadata would, had the Stasi had it, which might account for the Germans' interest in this, they'd gone green had they had the sort of powers or known about them that the NSA have, clearly. I slightly struggle actually, James, to buy the idea that America's the victim in all this, actually, if I'm really honest. I mean, I'm really struggling with that. But, you're talking to a room full of people who when we read the articles about this, we observe we're not Americans, and we're fair game, clearly. We don't even have the protections, as your greatest ally, that you appear to be giving yourself. Well, we don't have those protections, as you've already observed in this country. So, and I think it is surely pertinent to note that 84,000 people were given access to this, I understand, or have read, by the Americans. So I'm struggling to see, to portray you guys as the victims on this particular instance, though I accept that this shouldn't be an America bash. It's far more important than than that. Nevertheless, I'd fundamentally ask you all why on earth we shouldn't actually trust The Guardian on this. The Guardian is a fine newspaper that has demonstrated a proper public interest here. And frankly, I think we should be buying The Guardian because you can't maintain our trust if you're not prepared to give us the consent.
I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask. Let me come to you.
I'll buy The Guardian. I think what you're missing on the numbers when someone says 1 million people can read something.
Yes.
Okay, that's not really an accurate way of thinking about it. In WikiLeaks, just so you understand, essentially the librarian
Come in, General Alexander.
Yeah. the librarian.
I don't know what that was about.
I don't know quite who that was.
That was Keith Alexander.
The librarian gave away the library.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what Snowden did. He took as many documents as he could download. 50,000 is a lot of documents, even for the NSA.
And he's got more.
And he's got more. So 1 million people can't read all those things.
No, but they had access to them.
But that doesn't matter because you don't read everything.
No, but in terms of the security of them, it does. Because if
because no one person reads everything.
No,
that's the whole point of the system.
No, but you're playing Russian roulette with 1 million bullets, in terms of the stuff getting out, because there could be...
Julian's point is that if that many people can see it and download it, then they can release it.
No, but that million people can't take the whole library and read it. The librarian leaked it.
But it's our library. It's us. It's our data.
All right.
Can I come in here? Because basically, what happened with Snowden was
So you're
that
just debating. You're not actually...
Snowden had administrator access rights to certain parts of this library, so to speak, which, given what we now know about him, he clearly should not have had. The rest of it, he spoofed, and he should not have been able to do that. And so the controls were weak. I agree with that, and they should not have been. That was a fundamental failure. There is no way that you can seek to defend that. But I go back to your point about metadata and what it's for. And certainly, looking at this from a narrow counterterrorism or criminal conspiracy perspective, knowing who's in touch with whom can be as, if not more important than knowing what they're saying to each other, because this is a business where the bad guys are trying to hide the fact that they are in communication with each other. But the other point about this, about metadata, is it goes to the whole issue of big data, which is, I think, the debate we're having tonight is only a subset of what needs to be a much wider public discussion about big data, because this is a transformational phenomenon, the implications of which we're only just beginning to get to terms with. And the one thing you can say about big data with certainty is that you can use analysis of big data to ascertain patterns of correlation which are simply not discernible with lesser data sets. And this has applications in all sorts of areas, in retailing, in public health. You can identify all sorts of things, draw all sorts of conclusions about behaviors and their implications, which you just can't do with lesser data sets. So having this data and using it for different forms of analysis to look at patterns and anomalies is also very important. And I just don't see, could you really expect a government in today's world to exercise a self-denying ordinance in this regard?
Can I just ask you to pin down that point you're making? How many people would you think would have been in a position to do what Snowden did? Not 850,000.
No.
How many librarians were there? Sort of like 1,000, far fewer number.
Well, in the WikiLeaks case, we actually know something about it because it was State Department documents. Very few people would have had the computerization has created an ability to take the entire library and put it on a disk. That didn't exist before. You used to have to download and get papers in front of you, and they took the entire library for 3 years of all the cables sent from every embassy. No human being ever read all those things until they were leaked, and now somebody can spend their whole time doing it. The United States isn't the victim. I didn't think that. No, I didn't say the United States is the victim. I said, what were the motivations of the follow-up stories? I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not speaking on behalf of the United States. I'm asking the question, cost, benefit. In the earlier cases with civil liberties and metadata in the United States, for where I understand the legal situation, when you address the question of what the government should have and what they shouldn't have, you have a benefit of leaking, the fact that nobody knew they were doing this, and you have the cost of that going out. Now when we talk about these other issues that I've mentioned, which relate to American foreign policy, Iranian nuclear weapons, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, other matters of terrorism and other things, I'm not focusing only on terrorism, there is a cost to putting the thing out there. I don't see what the benefit is. That's what I described. Not that the United States is a victim. We're not as clever at debating as you are here in Britain. But what I'm talking about is what is the benefit of putting that information out there, and I still haven't heard anybody tell me what the benefit is.
Okay, well, I'll have a stab at it then before I go to your question. The benefit, is there not a benefit in having public awareness of how much information is being gathered, for example, in Afghanistan, to no benefit, apparently? And that is a concern, isn't it? And, I mean, I understand that something like 50% of Afghan adult males, the DNA is now there. Now, that seems an incredible amount of information to have, and I think it is fair, isn't it, to ask, is that correct? And is it useful to have got all that information? It seems to be a legitimate question.
About the DNA of Afghan
soldiers?
soldiers?
Is it reasonable for America to have so much information about both communications, DNA of so many Afghans? Is that a sensible, reasonable thing? I mean,
Don't understand the DNA point. Huh?
Me neither.
okay, well, it's my understanding that there are an incredible number of DNA samples of Afghan fighting males. Is it worth having all that information?
If you're fighting an Afghan insurgency, I guess there's something to be said for somebody having it.
Anyway.
Frank Jackson, World Disarmament Campaign. I want to challenge the basic premise of this debate. What do we mean by national security? 9/11 has been mentioned a few times. 9/11 was a heinous crime. It was not an attack on the security of the United States. Nigel mentions Bletchley Park in the Second World War. We're not in the same sort of situation as we were then. There is no country in the world which is attacking or threatening to attack the United States or the United Kingdom or the any other members of the European Union. There are one or two problems in certain parts of the war, like India and Pakistan, where there are states involved, but none of those things are not attacks on our national security. So what do you mean by national security? The army, the police force, the judiciary, the security services, what their fundamental purpose is to protect the existing order of society, whatever that society is, whether it's a communist dictatorship, an African warlord, a theocratic regime in Iran, or a semi-democracy as we have in the United States and the United Kingdom. But if you want to change that order of society, you've got a real problem. I would like to enlarge on that, but I'll just change the subject slightly. And if you want to protect the security of the people in the world, not simply the existing order, but the people in the world, then a far better expenditure of effort and everything would be to stop sending drones to kill people around the world. And if you did that, it would be a far greater help to stop the terrorists.
I think that has strayed. I mean, I know people do have views on drones here, but I think that has strayed from the subject. There's a question here. Is there any comment, first of all, on that? Any comments on this?
I mean,
Bit of a fan of drones.
the job of governments is to protect its citizens. You can call that national security, you can call it security, you can call it whatever you want. The fact is 9/11, they tried to hit the Pentagon and the White House. That was an attack on the United States. It wasn't just the World Trade Center. And, you know, I mean, I think that's all one has to say. Now, there may have been abuses and excesses, and there still are, and so on, but if you're defining what national security is, it is the job of the American government to protect itself and its citizens. I think that's the definition. Sorry.
Can I add just one footnote here? I think spy intelligence agencies seem to be very much engineer-driven, software engineer-driven. Don't get me wrong, I like engineers very much. We have great engineers in the office, but they come up with ideas. And, they just do it, you know. And my impression is that in the GCHQ, in the NSA, there were so many clever, presumably young guys like Edward Snowden, who had this fantastic idea of creating a Google for the NSA, a secret Google. And I think we're slowly understanding what the impact of this is.
Yeah.
Thanks. Just a very specific question, first of all, to Julian, which is, what was the public benefit of The Guardian discussing espionage against Russian targets, which you said it was just mass collection. There was an interesting story about Russia, which ran alongside the Turkey story. So what was the public benefit in that? A more general question is, the damage done isn't just a privacy loss from the NSA. One of the most interesting New York Times and Guardian stories was the weakening of encryption standards and the effect that had on general internet security. So, particularly for Nigel and Jamie, is there any limit to the way in which we increase the size of that haystack, the proverbial haystack? It's being assumed it's a given size, but of course there are various steps we can take, some of which have more general systemic weakening effects than others. And weakening encryption seems to be going beyond just tapping undersea cables. So, Nigel, Jamie, would you see any limits on how we can and should increase the size of that haystack?
Okay, first of all, on the Russia, what's the public benefit in what you published?
Well, the issue was that we held a summit. We invited people there, and we created these internet cafes that they could use. But we also cooperated with the NSA by intercepting their phone calls and used our position as hosts of this summit to gather intelligence from foreign leaders around the world.
So,
some of them were our ally.
So some of them were out, but it was a summit, Nate.
Yeah,
Russia is not an ally.
Yeah.
And Russia, we talked about in Russian communications was it Medvedev's intercepts from Menwith Hill? Well, I mean, that was
Okay, well, let's get to the heart of it, because this is your point as well. So what would you say is the public benefit, and it's a very precise example, in that release of that information?
I can't remember the details of the story. My understanding was that there was a general story of how the UK and NSA cooperated in order to listen in to pretty much all the delegations, to all the delegates to the G20 summit.
So it's trust of diplomatic communication.
Yes, I mean, we put ourselves forward as a G20 host, but used as an opportunity to do mass surveillance of foreign leaders.
Well, I think that is a matter for the politicians to make a judgment again about the cost benefit. There's nothing in terms of legality here that is at issue. It's simply a question of political judgment about risk benefit. And obviously, if indeed these reports are true, and I have no idea whether they are, then somebody obviously took that judgment about risk benefit. I don't know.
And what about the encryption point? Is weakening encryption undermining your own position?
That's an interesting point, and the honest answer is I don't know. I think that a lot more work needs to be done on this and a number of other areas. There are bigger questions here about the height of ladders and walls here.
The whole cyber question, which this relates to. To what extent do you have to learn how to penetrate somebody else's computer to know how he can penetrate yours? And that's the problem, is that the defense people will tell you the only way I'm going to learn how to defend our system is to figure out how to break into another person's system.
This is about weakening all encryption standards on the internet.
Look, I'm not. I mean, on its surface, the way you've described the question, I think it's obvious that that I would be in favor of not weakening encryption standards. I'm not in favor of everybody's information being public. I think what we've lost here is that the way the current internet works, everybody's lost their privacy. Every time we have somebody with a little cell phone who doesn't like what you're doing and takes your picture and puts it on the internet. And we forget that that's what's really changed, is that, you know, Steve's colleague Tom Friedman wrote about this 10 years ago. You know, everybody now has the power to, that used to be in the hands of the few, to humiliate through this tool called the internet. And it's the same thing in reverse. The ability to spread information has lost our privacy in every walk of our lives.
James, I'm sorry to say that, but I don't think that this is about benefits, and I think it's unfortunately not even about the damages also, although I think everyone is sorry for people getting harmed in the process of the revelations. But what it is about is a necessity of having this discussion, and what the WikiLeaks and Snowden came about because a system went out of control, which is to do with 9/11 and the terror laws, and then with the development of technology, which led to a situation where nobody knows exactly anymore how big the servers have to be, where they have been stored, what has to be stored, who wants to know what, and what are the laws. And what we need to do now, and what we are doing here tonight, but what everyone does at the moment in any government in this world, is to think, what laws do we need, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. So it's not about the benefits and the damages, but it's about 2013 and the world we live in and what we have to confront.
Well, I would just differ. I think it happened because an individual chose to break his oath to the government, named Mr. Snowden, and provided to the world 50,000 documents on his own initiatives, insisting that it was about civil liberties, and it now has nothing to do with civil liberties. And so I think his idea that this is about the rights of private citizens and civil liberties has been lost. And the same with WikiLeaks. An individual made a decision. Now, it's true that we now can... What happened is that it took Daniel Ellsberg 3 days to copy the Pentagon Papers. It took him 3 days to physically copy the Pentagon Papers. And now, one guy can do it much more easily and carry a lot more documents.
Right, what I'm going
That's
to
the
do is,
difference.
we've got about sort of 10 minutes left, so what I'm going to do is take a lot of comments from the floor, and then we'll have closing comments from everybody on the panel. So there's one here.
I just wanted to... My name is Dr. Dattenberg Doyle, and I'm a psychologist and run a small kingdom in Western Africa. I just wanted to say, I agree with Banksy. I basically think Al-Qaeda has won. And by Al-Qaeda, whatever they've achieved is now that we are all controlled. And what you think spying on us is fine. And if somebody spies on you, you think that's completely out of bound. And I don't think there's ever an end to this spying thing. It will go forever, and we'll lose all our privacy as a result of it.
Okay, there's a comment behind you. Yep.
I had a question, Alan Cowell from the New York Times. I had a question for Nigel Inkster, which is this. We've talked a lot about metadata, big data tonight. In that period of all these stories, you've had the Westgate thing in Nairobi, you've had a failed attempt to attack al-Shabaab commanders in Mogadishu. Just this week, a man walked into a mosque as a man and came out as a woman, as far as we all know. So my question is, in all this talk about electronic data, are we losing sight of what they used to call HUMINT? Are we not getting down? Are the intelligence agencies failing to keep track on the way they used to keep track on suspects?
Okay, there's one just the... Yep.
Just a quick comment, a couple of things. Going back to Iraq.
Sorry?
And the issue of the use of intelligence in that situation, which led to thousands of lives being lost of allied forces. Intelligence being used in a way which was, in my view, against the state interest. The broader point is coming back to the one of oversight, which is absolutely crucial to my mind, is that behind closed doors, who is asking the questions as to why this information is being analysed and in what way is it going to be taken forward.
Okay, oversight. But what's your first point? That it's against the state?
Well, the fact that the state can use intelligence in a way that fits its purpose, and that's what we saw with Blair and Bush back in 2003.
Okay, and there was one here, yes. If you could, we'll just take 4 or 5 more. There's one here. Yep.
Hi. First point is the US's relationship with Saudi Arabia, or the apparent breakdown of it in the past couple of weeks, the first major example of the impact on US foreign policy of all of these leaks. The second, what do the panel think of the idea that this is an example of active measures from Russia?
Can you explain that a bit more?
Active measures being the
Espionage.
policy of the KGB during the Cold War to infiltrate the Western secret services and systems and try and bring them down from the inside.
Okay, there's one over here.
Thank you. My name is Arjen van der Horst. I have a specific question for Mr. Rubin. You mentioned a few times that there's a legitimate debate to be had on American civil liberties. Shouldn't that include the civil liberties of European democracies? Because that seems to miss in the American debate. The American government doesn't seem to care. When you're non-American, it's a free-for-all.
Okay. And one last one here in the front row here. Yeah.
In terms of oversight, it was mentioned that the Foreign Secretary sees however many Secret Service documents a day. In terms of oversight, the question is, does he ever say no to any of them?
Oh, yes. I can tell you the answer to that. Yes, he does.
Okay, so a lot of comments. So I'm going to start with the two people who had things directed to them. Perhaps not surprisingly. So let me ask you to take on that thing about human intelligence and maybe the Foreign Secretary's role.
Okay, fine. Well, I mean, there is a kind of seesawing debate as between the relevant merits of technical and human intelligence, but it's a false debate because the reality is that good intelligence comes about when you have these two things working in harness. Technical intelligence has enormous benefits, but it also has limitations. As we used to say when I was doing my basic training, you can't ask a tape recorder questions. You can't tell the tape recorder to go back and find out, the answer to the two questions, that they didn't get last time. And the other thing, of course, is that these developments in the technology field are often enabled by human capabilities. It is a symbiotic relationship, so it's not one or the other. If it's going to work, it is both. Now, I accept that particularly in the United States, I think it's fair to say that we've seen more of a kind of seesaw here, and one or two directors of Central Intelligence have tended to privilege technological capabilities at the expense of human, and I think that was one of the vulnerabilities that America suffered from on the eve of 9/11, that human capabilities had been drastically run down, and that was undesirable. So basically you need everything if you're going to be in good shape. On the question of does the Foreign Secretary ever turn down submissions, of course he does. That's the whole point. This is a risk-benefit analysis. This is the British government being asked to make a judgment about whether potentially risky activity undertaken by the intelligence agencies is justified by the likely dividend. And of course they're going to say, they're going to look at this, quite hard. And there will be occasions in which they say, no, I don't buy your argument.
Saudi and European liberties.
Let me start with the European liberties and give a partial answer to your question as well. Look, I don't know what the facts are here. I heard Mr. Greenwald say that it was the U.S. NSA that swept up all these calls in France and Spain. And I heard Mr. Alexander say, no, actually it was the local intelligence service who was providing that information to the NSA.
Exactly.
And which one is right is a big answer to the question that was asked about the Europeans. It's the European government's job to find the right balance between civil liberties and intelligence in your government. And I suspect that a lot of the outrage that is being done is not real, that the German government knew perfectly well what was going on. And so if there's a legitimate debate about privacy versus and civil liberties versus intelligence gathering, I think that's a good thing. And everything about privacy and the internet and all of the things that I didn't very well explain about privacy being lost as a result of the modern communication capabilities is a good thing. But I know you guys don't like to hear it because I'm calling myself a victim, but there are downsides to doing this. And all I'm asking is that we have a reasonable balance of downsides versus upsides.
And the Saudi point?
And the Saudi point is about U.S. foreign policy, and it's not about intel. I think that the President Bush, look, I'll say it as 3 sentences. For 40, 50 years, I believe the United States created an account of goodwill in the world by doing a lot of things, whether it was the Cold War, whether it was World War II, whether it was Bosnia, Kosovo, Somalia, arguably Kuwait as well. And the account was quite full. And I think George Bush, for a variety of reasons, expended that goodwill account by throwing out of treaties and left and right, by invading Iraq, and then the worst sin, apparently, is screwing it up and not being even good at it. Had we imposed a modicum of democracy, I think the balance would be different. So that account was emptied by the time Obama came into office. The good news is he stopped withdrawing, and we didn't go into debt. But I don't think Obama has deposited. And I think it's been a real surprise to people how little deposits of goodwill the United States has made over the last several years. And so when something like this hits, there's not a lot to fall back on. It was exhausted by Bush, and no new deposits have been made. And if we don't start making some deposits soon, I think it's going to be a much worse situation. And that is the basis on which the Saudis feel like, whether it was Egypt or particularly Syria, that we have become less relevant to them.
Do you think
and
the
therefore,
NSA is a deposit? Do you think that's a good deposit?
The NSA is not a deposit. That's not what I'm talking about. If you think that's what I said, then you didn't understand it, and I'd have to say it again, and he doesn't want me to do that.
We got the point. Now, then, on the European civil liberties, could you respond in your closing remarks to the fact that the Europeans, are doing this? It's not an American thing.
Of course, yeah. Can I respond first to Vaughan's comment, because he mentioned the Stasi, and I feel obligation as a German to say at least one sentence about this. I think, of course, they would have been happy if they had, if they still existed and had these capabilities that GCHQ and NSA had. But that's not the point. We're not living in a totalitarian society, and I think when we debate this, we have to be a little bit more sincere and honest. We're not living in a society. The UK government doesn't want to control its citizens as much as the GDR did. So that's an important distinction. But I think the debate is going in the right way, because we're seeing the first politicians saying that, our agencies, the NSA, went a little bit too far. You mentioned Dianne Feinstein. John Kerry said that British MPs talking about more oversight. So this is one of the benefits of the revelations. I agree they come very late, only 5 months after the first article appeared, but that's one of the benefits, that we're having a really sincere debate about how we can improve this oversight about these engineers. Let me make one last point. I disagree with everything Nigel said, but one thing. That is, we don't have the adequate metaphors. We've been talking the whole evening about this haystack, about phone bugging. Nobody bugs phones anymore. So we need to understand this, and that's our job, and my job as Julian's job as a journalist, to explain what's happening in these agencies to some extent, without trying to violate national security without damaging national security. That's our job as translators, to try to enlighten the debate. And I think there are so many politicians who are happy about this.
I could just, if I could, make three very quick points. One, the Stasi knew a lot, but it didn't save them, and it didn't save the system, right? So that's very important to know. The second thing, I've just come from 5.5 years in France, and the DGS listens to everything and to everyone, period. And there are very few oversights, by the way.
None.
You know, I mean, you're better off here, believe me, if you're worried about privacy, if that's your issue. But they're also pretty good, the French, at counterintelligence. And they're a great asset. But we, the United States, would never let them into Five Eyes because we don't trust them either. Right? The third point I would make is about Saudi. I think Jamie's right. I mean, the problem is the mess in the Middle East, which we're not capable of handling, and no one's really capable of handling. And the Saudis think we're cozying up too much to the Shia, to Iran, to their enemies, and they don't trust us particularly, and they're very angry with us for blowing Egypt. You know, I mean, I think it's more to do with that. And the last thing I'd like to say is simply this. What worries me, besides all the things we've talked about, I just want to throw one more pebble into the ocean or pond, whatever it is we live in this world. The cliche is it's an interconnected world, right? There's the cloud. If we start making national distinctions in the cloud, as some of us would like to do, I think we really will damage our ability to do research, to communicate. I mean, there's a lot of talk in Europe about having some European net, like Galileo. Thank God for Galileo. And I just worry there's a lot of damage. If we damage companies, even though they're private, like Google and Yahoo and so on, if we draw these fake distinctions because we think we're protecting ourselves, we also risk a lot of future damage, it seems to me.
Thank you.
I mean, obviously there is a lot to be said on the national security, defense and national security issue. I mean, I am grateful that there is a intelligence service out there that could and may stop an explosion on a bus. It's, you know, when I go out onto the street. The question is, how do we measure saving ourselves from that bomb in terms of what we're prepared to do to stop it? And since 9/11, you know, we've gone to Iraq, we've got involved in rendition and torture and Guantanamo and damaged our national security in all sorts of ways by poor policy judgments. And now this all-encompassing surveillance architecture that, you know, if not so benign people were in government could easily be turned into a totalitarian state. And what all these things have in common is a lack of oversight and a lack of knowledge among our elected representatives on what's going on, because it's like an autoimmune response gone out of control. You know, the security agencies have been given the lead since 9/11, and the democratic institutions have been running behind them and never quite catching up.
The last time I did one of these, everyone agreed, and
that didn't happen.
It was slightly dull. So on this occasion, I'm very, very grateful for the difference of opinion, and thank you very much to an excellent panel. Thank you.